huge topic. We're not going to be able to facilitate all the conversations, but hopefully, like the film, it'll evoke and provoke further thought and further discussion. So it seems, Dr. Zook, and we're joined in the panel by Dr. Aisha Wilson-Carter and Dr. Jonathan Lightfoot, along with Sekiya and Professor Dorsett and Dr. Zook, who you met before. So it seems like we left off in the middle of this story a little bit, Dr. Zook. Tell us where things stand at the moment. And I'm wondering about the emotions of the community and the resolve of the community after the difficulties that they went through in the film.
So a lot has happened in 2025, which we didn't get on camera. As I said, the first Black mayor, Monroe Nichols, was elected in August, and he came into office towards the end of the year. People assumed that he would fight for reparations, although that wasn't on his agenda. He's not even from Tulsa, he's from Waco, Texas. But he kept things close to his, he played his cards close to his chest. No one really knew exactly what he was going to do. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was looking at the city council. Remember, Councilor Hall Harper said she needed to count to 5. And he saw, after many meetings with councilors, that he was not going to, she wasn't going to get those 5 votes. So he made a difficult decision. On June 1st, 2025, which is now a municipal holiday, Tulsa Race Massacre Observation Day, he proclaimed that holiday for the first time. He announced that he was putting into effect $105 million in reparations using private funding. So, because the city council knew wasn't going to come forward. So it's a historic moment. The fund is set to be operational June 1st, 2026.
Yeah. So, Professor Dorsett, as a documentarian, you're always looking for the truth, which is you expect it to find, and the truth which revealed itself as you were there looking. And I was wondering, how do you go about telling this particular story? What is it that you found when you were there that was still cogent and relevant?
I think that, for us when we got there, they really were not prepared to be filmed per se. And I think, when it comes to local politics, where you have to see your counselor in the grocery store, it's hard to be as vulnerable as you'd like to be. And so we spent most of the time really trying to break through. When we arrived, Councilor Hall Harper was tough, you could see right away. And it really wasn't until day 5 when I turned up to her church and she was like, "Oh, you here? Okay, let's go." And we went inside together, walking together, that I was like, wow, I wish I could have had more time. I wish I had more of those days. Same thing with, Bengal. He wanted to walk away from our interview. And we were waiting there for 20 minutes. And I went to quick thinking. And again, I think one of my superpowers is connecting with folks that I really kind of have a deep connection with. And I just told him, I said, listen, we're just here to capture your humanity. And he kind of paused a little bit, and then we laughed together, and then he sat down to do the interview. And so, we really wanted him to be a part of that process. And so it was essential that we have everybody involved. And I think that's really what I'm trying to do when it comes to documentary, capture humanity. And so, that moment where Vanessa coming home, right? This woman that has to be tough as a Black woman, sitting on the counselor, you see her, she has that steely gaze, and then you just see her break down and she's laughing, and it's just this beautiful moment with the Black family. That was really important. And so I think we were able to capture their humanity, and there's so much left on the table. We even had Councilor Bengal talk to one of the Democrats and go out and have just like this wonderful time at the market together. There's so much footage left. And so I was really happy to be there. And Tulsa kind of reminded me of my own project. I'm doing a project called I Love Bed-Stuy, and it's all about people power. And what Tulsa represents, the councils represent, is people power. And I think now in this moment where we are fighting against the big White House, we have to remember that there is still power within our local politics, within our local politicians, and our vote still counts. And it's those councilors that can move the needle for you in your community. So it was really, really an amazing experience.
So this question for either Dr. Zook or Professor Dorsett, I had the privilege of seeing some of the footage which was not included. And I'm wondering about the attitudes of the people that were living in the city. Was everyone on board, or was there divergence of opinions about this matter?
Well, let me tell you something. You told us, you said you have to go to the barbershop when you get there. And we did go to the barbershop, and there were some opinions from folks, black folks, that said, hey, we got to pull ourselves up by our bootstrap. Like, I'm a hard worker. We don't need reparations. There were those people there. Those were those dissenting voices. We didn't have time to build out that kind of sequence with them. But yes, I think that there's a lot of different various views in Tulsa around reparations and what that looks like. And I think Hall Harper really is clear that reparations is tangible. So yes, there was a lot of differing views.
So Dr. Lightfoot, and I know you could probably give us a whole semester worth of education on this subject because it is very deep. But I was wondering if you could sort of give us an overview, a little bit of the reparations movement. And is Tulsa unique in what they were experiencing?
Tulsa is not unique. There's many state, municipal, local governments that are moving towards giving the descendants of enslaved people, people who endured Jim and Jane Crow through the decades, through the last 100 or so years. And there's also movements to, make certain that, the experiences of redlining with housing, with educational apartheid, the experiences there, police violence, mass incarceration, and so forth, that reparations is not just what you receive for the damages that were done for enslaved period from descendants of 3 and 4 and 5 generations ago, but current today people who've experienced police violence and so forth. But as far as giving a real historical context, I just first like to say that the Middle Passage, the months, and I'm saying months plural, was a long voyage of kidnapped Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. It was barbaric, it was savage, it was horrific, traumatic, and deadly. And slavery, likewise, was traumatic, brutal, violent, debilitating, psychologically damaging, and soul-crushing. The post-Reconstruction period of Jim and Jane Crow segregation was riddled with fear, torture, pain, lynchings, and macro and microaggressions. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s was a battle to hold America accountable for the freedoms won via the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments made to the Constitution after the bloody Civil War. Since then, Black America has fought to retain those victories of voting rights, affirmative action, equal employment opportunity, equal educational opportunity, fair housing, and many other civil and human rights due to being citizens of this nation and being part of the human family on this earth. Social justice must be understood and carried out in triangular fashion, meaning the past, the present, and the future cannot be separated and detached from policy. The attention and study of each time period flows like rivers of water. Indeed, biblical scripture calls for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That was from Amos 5:24. But what God has put together, let no man put asunder. What man breaks, man must repair. Those people who sought to break a people must be held accountable to repair a people. Those systems that man uses to perpetuate the degradation, humiliation, and brokenness of a people must work to repair those people. Thus, reparations is not only just, fair, and right, it is also ordained by Almighty God. I want to talk about this H.R. 40, the bill that's like being in Congress now. I'll just give you a backdrop on that. Back in 1989, H.R. 40 was a bill to study reparations for African Americans. It was introduced by Congressman John Conyers. He titled the bill, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. It aimed to create a commission to examine the impact of slavery and propose remedies. The number 40 was chosen to memorialize the promise of 40 acres and a mule made after the Civil War, and I think most of us are familiar with the promise of 40 acres and a mule. It is proposed U.S. legislation. It establishes a federal commission. It also includes the potential remedies like formal apology or compensation. The commission would investigate the enduring harms of slavery and discrimination, gather evidence, and propose solutions to the lasting economic, educational, and health disparities faced by Black communities. While the bill has gained momentum, and support from various organizations, states, and various local government, it has not yet passed Congress. In 2025, Ayanna Presley, I believe, current Congresswoman from Massachusetts, she's recently reintroduced it again. And we've had many scholars and researchers who've written books on it. For instance, Randall Robinson in The Debt, What America Owes to Blacks, was published in 2000. In that book, he argues that America owes reparations both to the descendants of American enslaved and other Blacks who have suffered from legalized racial discrimination. He offers a historic precedent for this and suggests that reparations be made in terms of establishing a trust to grant educational scholarships for Blacks based on need. Two other authors I like to mention are Cornell historian Edward Baptist. In his book, The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism, in 2014, where he argues that slavery, and specifically the traumatic inducing and brutally enforced labor in the cotton industry, was a central driver of the U.S. economy in the 19th century. His work is significant for its powerful reinterpretation of American history. And also in the same year, 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in The Atlantic that got a lot of public and mainstream press. The title, The Case for Reparations, 250 Years of Slavery, 90 Years of Jim Crow, 60 Years of Separate but Equal, and 35 Years of Racist Housing Policies. He says, until we reckon with our compounding moral debts, America will never be whole. And I go through a number of, for and against, people who are for, like you said, Professor Dorsett. Not every person is on board with paying reparations, whether it be cash or land or other forms of community investment. But it does, I think, warrant us to discuss just what it would cost so that we can get our head around how we can come up with a methodology that would give us some kind of structure and way to calculate and base this whole wealth gap that we experience today. So there's some estimates of the cost of U.S. reparations. It ranges from $10 trillion to $14 trillion based on some calculations, and some estimates even higher suggest that 6.2 quadrillion when factoring interest on unpaid wages. So this wide range is due to different methodologies, such as accounting for unpaid labor and the long-term effects of systemic racism. The $10.7 trillion to eliminate the wealth difference would mean that every eligible person, and there's argument about who's eligible for reparations, whether you're, with descendants from the 10 to 12 generations who were enslaved from 1600 before the nation was even the United States, until the emancipation in 1863 post-Civil War, comes to $267,000 per eligible person. But
so I'm going to pick up on that point there. I'm going to come right back to it. But I want to pick up on one particular aspect of what you said. You talked about the continuing resolution about apology, a real apology.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Wilson Carter, it was mentioned in the film also this beyond apology.
Yeah.
The resolution. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, definitely. So bring it, kind of thinking about that Beyond Apology Commission. And so this was the organization that their goal is to reconcile, restore, and unite by securing prosperity for the descendants affected by the massacre, specifically in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So they recommend housing, reparative justice, and that this is not just a conversation, that there are actually, it's money and land, right? So we heard Councilwoman Hall Harper say reparations is money, is cash and land, right? And an apology is not reparations. Everything else is really just good policy moving forward. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that we have models for that. So in Evanston, Illinois, they're one of the first U.S. cities to implement local reparations program. So they offer direct housing benefits to Black residents who again meet the specific historical criteria that they set out. Asheville, North Carolina has also established a reparations commission and made recommendations. So both of these are being challenged and have been challenged. So in Asheville, North Carolina, the U.S. Department of Justice is suing them, claiming that any race-based remedies may violate civil rights laws. And so a little bit about Evanston's program in Illinois, going back to it, they offered reparations. At this point, they have dispersed up to $3 million in direct benefits. Right now, they are facing a class action lawsuit, again, claiming that it's discriminatory by limiting the eligible Black recipient, or limiting the program to just eligible Black recipients. In Asheville, there are challenges, as I said, they're being sued by the Department of Justice right now. And essentially what they're saying is that, you cannot go forward with this because there are other people who lived here, and they should also be entitled to any kind of reparations, whether it be a housing benefit, direct payment in cash. And so what people who are supporting the program say is that that kind of alleviates the entire point of reparations, right? That this is to reconcile and repair the direct harm to Black residents and people who fall in line with the historical precedent of being eligible for it, for these benefits. So I do also want to talk about, thinking about what is good policy then, right? So if it's not reparations, what are some of the things that have been done that are good policies? And we see these across states like California, some in New York as well, and the ones I mentioned. But I'll mention a very specific story that happened in North Carolina. And so it's in Roseville, about 20 miles outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And I mention this because it is my sister-in-law's great-great-grandfather who was lynched in 1918. And his name was George Taylor. And so, again, a similar commission made up of educators and students in North Carolina State University, we're trying to build this project around lynching and around what's how many lynchings and finding people and their relatives and their descendants. So George Taylor specifically, he was lynched because a white woman accused or came and said she was assaulted. And she was asked to identify George Taylor. Initially, she said it was not him, but they arrested him. And later, by the end of the day, she said, oh, okay, yes, it was him. So before they could even get him to the jail, 4 men dressed as Ku Klux Klan stopped the sheriff's car, took him out, and they mutilated his body. They hung him, and then they shot him over 100 times after they already hung him. Crowds from surrounding areas came to watch this and some of them picked up the bullets that were at the scene of the lynching and kept them as souvenirs. And so I tell you that specific story because when we think about lynching, right, and we think about why reparations for what? Right, so we can go back to enslaved, we can go back to the housing, we can go back to the GI Bill, we can go back to all the discriminatory practices and Jim Crow, of course. But even something like lynching, right? So again, this man who was just accused of this crime could not even be tried or properly arrested or anything, was lynched. So, and we think about lynching, 25% of lynching at the time was based on mere accusations, right? So the Red Record Project accounted for 175 lynchings in North Carolina between the end of the Civil War in the 1940s. So I just say that because this story was uncovered by a committee remembrance coalition. And what they did was then give Taylor's family a marker. My sister-in-law went there, she spoke at it. They also adopted a curriculum for high school and middle school students in North Carolina. And the University of North Carolina, it's called the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, was planning to do an event, bring people there. All of this has been stopped. So they took out the curriculum, they offered the class. So my sister-in-law updated me this summer and said they cannot run the class. The states and the governor said it cannot run. They had to take the class out of the course catalog because obviously there were laws passed in North Carolina about telling truthful history, essentially, is what the laws are about. So I think this question of reparations and what does it look like, so the hope was that that was the apology, right? The marker, all these things were the beginning of the apology, and we could move forward with actually getting some form of reparations acknowledgement for the descendants of Mr. Taylor.
I want to connect something that Jonathan was saying. He were trying to come to a sort of assessment financially in the trillions of dollars of what reparations would look like financially. So, Dr. Zook, I was wondering, is there any sort of assessment of that for Tulsa? Like, what was lost? Is there a number we can ascribe to that loss?
The question is, no, because they haven't even accurately accounted for how many were killed. The estimate is 300, some say 40, but we know that many more were disappeared, killed, left. 35 square blocks of, neighborhood, churches, restaurants. It was a thriving community, Black Wall Street. It was doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, lived there. It was self-contained and independent, which is why many people say they wanted to destroy it. The Beyond Apology Commission modeled its program after Evanston. In Evanston, which was the first city in America to give reparations in 2019, others have tried but didn't quite get there yet. Evanston successfully has given reparations of $25,000 to qualified individuals based on this idea that between, forget the exact years, but
1919 to 1969.
That there was concerted discrimination in housing, and being able to just specifically zero in on housing is a model that Tulsa is using as well, or used. The Beyond Apology Commission used that model to say, we can prove that houses were lost, neighborhoods were lost, that were burned to the ground. So they proposed a city tax, just like Evanston. Evanston proposed a city tax using the sale of cannabis.
Yep.
Tulsa, the Beyond Apology Commission proposed the same thing. But what's really interesting right now is that Mayor Nichols has said, yes, he's going to honor what the Beyond Apology Commission has asked for. Housing, definitely. Then he wrote beyond that. And I think for those of us who were listening on June 1st when he made his speech, people's jaws were dropped. People were crying deforestation, which had been halted. He's going to do this and that. And at the end, he said, and as of this moment, I'm releasing the 45,000 pages of public documents that have been withheld.
Wow.
All of the minutes of the meeting, city council meetings, where they proved that they had talked about destroying this community, and that they had talked, it was a conspiracy to make sure that they couldn't rebuild, and that they would just get out and leave and move further north so that they could have it. Advocates have been suing for those documents for some time, and Mayor Nichols just said, it's already on the website. At that moment, it's already on the website, 45,000 pages. So I think, I've heard from sources since then that, yes, the money is very important, but I've heard from a lot of people who said the truth is more important.
Yes.
And having that public, having that acknowledgement, it was more powerful for some members of the Beyond Apology Commission than money.
Dr. Lightfoot, we've heard some arguments from aggrieved white citizens, and I would like you to respond to some of these arguments. One argument was, I wasn't here, I didn't do that. This is, I just was an immigrant to this country. I wasn't even alive when these things happened. Why should I have to pay for reparations?
I think the best response to that question is that, as a person who, is of European descent, and we oftentimes determine, racial classification and racial, categorization, by appearances, phenotype, how you look. And, if you, look white and you receive white privilege in a system as the United States, is so structured, that's built on white supremacy, that built on white privilege, and you benefit from the advantage of that enslaved people's labor, created, in a system like that. So, by fiat, you become, part of that program, unless you, say, I don't accept my white privilege, but then that's not possible either. You rarely find someone who's rejecting, benefits and privileges that are afforded to them based on, how they look or whatever that, this whole myth of meritocracy that we have a system based on, the best and the brightest, the leaders who, have, passed the tests and got the degrees and certifications and so forth. But, within our, seats of power in government and so forth, those who, understand themselves to, have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and who are deserving of, to be in leadership and to have the, the best that America has to offer, we have to, interrogate the bias, of those individuals. And I just want to share with you one from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, when we asked the question, what do opponents of slavery reparations say? And so he said most Americans don't see the point of slavery reparations, most. And that's racially determined also. So only 29% of Americans agree that the federal government should pay cash reparations, according to a 2019 Associated Press poll, and only 46% believe that the government should even issue a formal apology for slavery, quite interestingly. And a 2021 poll had similar results, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell summed up the view of many who oppose reparations in his remarks ahead of a 2019 June 2019 House Judiciary Committee meeting about reparations. He says, quote, "I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation, elected an African-American president," and Barack Obama is speaking of. "I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it would be hard to figure it out whom to compensate." So there is, a capsule that captures the sentiment, a lot of people, who feel that way. And as Professor Dorsett says, even, they have some people in Tulsa who are black who feel that, they're being given something. You're not being given something. You're given something that's owed to you, that is rightfully yours. We have a system of inheritance in this country that, you inherit the wealth of your ancestors, your grandfather, your father, your mother, so forth. That's how we pass along wealth. Nobody starts from scratch when they're born. People, are living off of old money and inherited wealth, and they build on that. And so if your parents, your grandparents, were systematically excluded from opportunities to own land, to build wealth from their labor, and had nothing to pass unto you, then generationally, you're going to be left out. There you have a wealth gap.
Dr. Wilson Carter, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just I think in the film, right? I can't remember what Councilman Bengal says.
And that's why we needed Bengal.
Yeah.
We had to negotiate to get him because we needed that view.
Yeah, so he says that he doesn't believe in transferring generational guilt, right? But we always transfer generational something, right? So is it wealth? Is it guilt? Is it socioeconomic status, whatever that is? Is it harm? Is it trauma? We get what our ancestors gave us, right? From our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. So that idea of just like thinking about the pushback against reparations, and totally I understand it, but just kind of putting it in perspective, recently, right, the Supreme Court gave immigration the green light to use race as a factor in stops to effectively kind of racially profile citizens based just on what the language they're speaking and what they look like, to stop them, detain them, deport them, whatever the case may be. We've been doing racial profiling forever, right? We've always done that in this country. So the idea that the Supreme Court made it legal, right, legalize that yet again, we can use race, right, to oppress people, but we can't use race for justice, right, to assure justice and correct an injustice. We can't use it to repair. We can't use it to let as one of the factors after all of the other qualifications are met. We can't use it in admissions for college and education, which Black and brown people have been systemically left out of, right? But we can use it to oppress them. We can use it to jail them, right? We can use it for all these reasons. So that pushback, I think, against reparations is to answer that is really important, just because it is legitimate. It is not a fringe idea. So really thinking about reparations, we have paid reparations in this country. We've paid it to the Japanese, right, when we put them in internment camps. So, and they went to the Supreme Court to fight for that. We paid reparations. So it's important that we understand that internationally, right, recognizes the right to reparations for crimes against humanity all across the world, right? So why should the United States be absolved from reconciling, from repairing, right, and from justice, right? So that, I think that is more of the question, is why does the United States get to kind of leave that off the table and not pay reparations? Why is it a conversation non-starter here?
So I have a question for Professor Dorsett, but in the meantime, we have two microphones on the other side. We'd like to open up this conversation, so please make your way to the microphones with your questions, because I know this is a huge topic. So Professor Dorsett, we heard both Dr. Lightfoot and Dr. Zook talk about, in a sense, ongoing harm. And it seemed in the documentary there was still ongoing harm in Tulsa. What was that like? What did you see? What is the example of ongoing harm? We saw the destruction of the community center. We saw some other examples.
I think when it comes to Tulsa, it's just a weight. When you walk through those streets, especially in Greenwood, you feel that weight. You feel that there's something that has yet to be reconciled. And so, you know, as we were even walking with Councilor Dector Wright and Councilor Hall Harper, that moment of the Greenwood Rising is still, even Tulsa tries so hard to, in quote, make things right that they continue to do harm. That center, no one, the descendants of those that were harmed were not involved in putting that center together. They have Disney-fied the Tulsa Race Massacre. So those moments where you see them kind of reckoning with that, and as we were there, our DP, which was really great, we had a DP, Charles Elmore, kind of told us about them in the city. There's never a moment where the massacre isn't on someone's mind. There's never a moment where people feel like justice is being brought to them. And that weight continues to carry with each citizen every single time. So it's really heavy in the city. It's very, very heavy.
Yes, your question.
Thank you so much for this. I happened to have visited over the summer, and it was right after June 1st. Must have been around the 6th or the 7th that we were traveling through, my daughter and I, and we went to the museum. And I learned a lot from the museum because, for instance, Native Americans, I had no idea about the scope of this injustice and about all the different types of people who were caught up in this. But I felt the same thing walking down the street, but this was all something that was in progress. So I want to ask a little bit more. You just started talking about the museum. If the descendants did not have a part in that, who did? And I wonder if in the documentary you'll talk more about that piece of the story, because I think it's so important to avoid having conflict over this telling of the story. But that's something you only get one chance at, you know, moving forward.
So, Dr. Zook.
Who is involved? Tulsa has a huge philanthropic community, very powerful philanthropic community. Kaiser Foundation, it has its hand in almost every aspect of city government, culture. It's enormously powerful. And the head of that organization—
1 second, you have to lean forward.
The head of that organization is Councilor Lakin, City Councilor Lakin, who is the only person who absolutely refused to talk to me, even though he's been involved in a lot of these decisions intimately. So what starts out as looking philanthropic ends up looking paternalistic. And the community has said over and over again, Councilor Hall Harper says, you know, what you do for us, you do to us. It has to be telling our story, it has to be our, and that's why the Beyond Apology Commission had to be members of the community, had to be formed by, had to be, you know, contain descendants who actually made this recommendation. So it's a really important, loaded question. The history of the museum is so fraught and it was so contentious. And if you look at it, yes, it was led by an African-American senator who represents that district, and you think, oh, great. But, you know, when I spoke to him a couple of years ago, it was adversarial to the community, like Hall Harper said. And so, you know, and he's ultimately interested in capitalism. He's interested in black
You can
capitalism,
see that
but all capitalism. So he
Yeah.
partnered with his Republican colleagues in the Senate to make it happen. But I also just want to say that a lot of these folks, going back, I had a comment about the generational guilt, you know, not wanting to, this is a popular American perspective. Why should I pay for what my ancestors did? Most Americans feel that way. And so it was really important to me to get Councilor Bangle on board from the beginning our first conversation we ever had a few years ago was more than 2 hours. And I'm still amazed to this day, my editor is amazed that he talked to me so frankly. He did get camera shy when we got there, but he talked and he's continued to talk to me since then. And he's an important part of the book because he represents this feeling that most Americans feel. And the fact that he would talk so openly and allow himself to be vulnerable, he's worried that he may be perceived as racist. He shared that with me the last time I saw him. But this is his truth. And so my goal was to make this, to talk about, why we as Americans can't seem to talk to each other. And can Tulsa end up ultimately talking to each other? Can the 9 members of the city council talk to one another to come to some kind of agreement, some kind of amends? And the wild card, Councilor Anthony Archie, is getting reparations because his wife has Native American descent. And so he's another complicated figure that I wanted to include. I wanted it to be all these layers of complexity and not just a simple story. He's Black, but he's not sure if he supports reparations. Although he's getting, his family's getting reparations. They have free healthcare and free housing. So,
I think there's a quote that we have started to use in documentary because, most times, back in the past from Nanook of the North, people would parachute into a place and document a people. And so the quote that we are really standing by is, nothing for us without us. So this idea in Tulsa has to be the same. If there's going to be anything, any way to move forward, it has to include the descendants each and every time. And so, even for us, 2 Black women going there telling this story, that is a really big deal. There's been tons of crews that have gone to tell the Tulsa story, and they have not always looked like us. So this is a really great moment.
Yes.
Hello. I was really interested in the part where you showed the council meeting, the town hall type of meeting, and there was a white gentleman that spoke about how he wanted how it was Black-centered advocacy, and I just wanted to know what other instances, because you said that there was a lot of footage that you didn't end up putting in the sizzle, but hopefully you'll put it in the documentary. But there's a lot of footage that you didn't end up putting in the sizzle. So I wanted to know what other instances, or did you see any other instances of that type of racially racist, racially charged energy, and how did you feel about it? And why did you choose, if you did, why did you choose to leave that out? Why did you choose to leave it out?
Professor Dorsett?
We unfortunately, if we are really truly to get deep involved in the Tulsa story, we are going to have to stay there and really follow the council for a whole year. The most disturbing part of the council, I think, is Phil Lakin. This idea that there's a man that almost is like double dipping. There's so many layers that we have to unpack, and we would have to be there. We would have to gain trust. In terms of things that we left out, so much. I think the character that I wanted to develop was the young man that serves on the council, and Taylor. And he kind of represents the future of Tulsa. And we didn't really have that perspective. We really need your generation in there to show how they're going to move forward. So I think if there's anything that we would have added is probably to spend more time with him. And because Tulsa is so small, it's like an orbit. Everybody's connected. We went to the church and he was there. We went to the barbershop and he was there. He was at the Beyond Apology meeting. I was like, this is like a small town. So it's a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to kind of unpack. And the web that's weaved in Tulsa to untangle that web is where the power of this documentary really lies. And I think to do that, we have to sit with people and we have to gain their trust, especially on camera.
If I may ask, how old is that, the young man on the council?
I think he's in his 20s, right?
Taylor West, he's
Yeah.
a college student, he's in his 20s, but he's on the and what's interesting is the commission decided that they would have a youth representative. And so he was the last one to come on board. I don't know, it took a while to find the youth representative, but they also have an elder representative. So you can see the commission being formed specifically really to represent the community as a whole. It had to have descendants on it. Not everyone, but it had to have some descendants. It had to have people who specialized in housing and in law. And, so it was a thoughtful commission. And Taylor West is a huge activist, even at his age. He's everywhere. And so he is a worthy of following as other members of the Beyond Apology Commission, I think, too. To answer your question, it's not in the film, it's in the book, but Vanessa Hall Harper was once confronted by this big dude on a Harley with tattoos, white guy. She described him as someone she would assume is, a racist, right? And she tells this story to me about how she had to reach for a pistol, and she's never shot anyone before, but she really at that moment thought she was going to have to shoot him because he came up to her, in an aggressive, she thought, way outside the grocery store. And she was putting her groceries in the back of her trunk. And that story to me is one of the times when she was most vulnerable with me. And I really appreciated her talking about how afraid she was, because to the community, you never see Vanessa Hall Harper afraid. Never, right? And so her talking about that, her daughter had also been faced with somebody like that while she worked at Home Depot as a cashier one summer. She was working at Home Depot, and some guy came up to her and said, is Councilor Hall Harper your mother? And, is Marcus Harper your father? He's a lieutenant in the police, in the Tulsa Police Department, who called out the racist police force publicly. And it's got into a whole bunch of, they tried to bring him down, they tried to send him to jail. But these are two instances when that family has been threatened by white supremacy and was scared.
Next question, please.
Hi. In the council hearing, I was also interested in the what that man said. If we can't have it, none of you can. And especially with the mention of the Department of Justice suing for what seemed like around the same reasons. So my question is, especially from like a legal standpoint, how do you separate the ideas of advocacy and racial bias?
Just to understand your question, because I think we to focus our response, advocacy and racial bias. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So, especially with transitional wealth and guilt, mentioning the Tulsa, the damages that should be repaid.
Okay.
I
So you got it?
Yeah, I think I got it.
Sorry.
And it's funny, it's from our last meeting. And I wrote it down as we were all talking. I think so. So what does it mean to adjudicate a wrong, repair, and reconcile? So I think that is the biggest difference, right? And so, like I said, I completely understand. I don't know whether I'm pretty sure I would get reparations historically, like if they went to descendants or whatever from housing my grandfather and GI Bill, getting excluded from that, all of those things. But regardless of that, I understand the case of, or the feeling of not wanting to, provide reparations. I understand that, right, from people today, even from, like you said, some of the people in the barbershop. I don't need anything. We work hard. We're fine. That sort of idea. But I think the difference between racial bias, right, and advocacy or discrimination is we're not talking about made up things, right? We're talking about the building of a country based on free labor. Right. So cotton was the #1 export. It made America rich, right? Cotton, sugar, tobacco, all of those people doing, fielding that and farming those goods were all free labor. They were enslaved people. So that is the first thing. But then we go throughout, right? So we could have stopped at Reconstruction, where we got full rights. Again, not everyone was allowed to vote, but Black men were allowed to vote. They were in we could have done all of that and stayed on that path, right? We could have provided 40 acres and a mule, which was what was supposed to happen. We could have done all of that. We would not be here if we did all of that, if we righted the wrong after the civil right, after the Civil War, and all those things, we wouldn't be where we are today talking about these things. And I think that is what's missed upon maybe people who that we're here now who maybe don't understand, is that we never did what we were supposed to do. So we're still suffering the consequences and the ramifications of not righting the wrong then, not repairing the injustice then. I wish we didn't all have to be talking about this. I wish that wasn't the case. So I think that's the difference. So when the Supreme Court or people go to sue and say, hey, you're discriminating against me, or, whatever the case, whatever racial category or whatever it might be, because they are excluded from these reparations or this righting of the wrongs, it's because there's real things, right? Jim Crow kept segregation, kept people, out of businesses, government. So we can go to every single decade up until the civil rights movement, right? And that's 1960s. And then we can still go thereafter in the implementation of the laws that were passed and the fighting against those laws that were passed. So this is not, we don't even have to go back to enslavement. Right, we can go back 40 years. We can go back 30 years. Right, the Long Island is still racially segregated, according, based on redlining. Still to this day, schools in different neighborhoods still don't get the same amount of equitable funding. All of this stuff still goes on. That's why we're still talking about it. That's why you'll have people still fighting. That's why affirmative action is still necessary. It's all of those things. So I completely understand if we don't understand the historical context, why it might seem like to a lot of people, why are we doing this? It is because we never righted the wrongs.
I'm trying to see your question a little bit, just to take off from you. Everything you said was accurate. But I think the difference here when you're talking about advocacy, and I'm looking at, civil versus criminal. So when you sue in the civil court, the goal is, material compensation, some cash. You want money as a result. And it's determined on the preponderance of the evidence if you are suing civilly. And so I think this quest for reparations is a civil exercise, that we are looking for some material, compensation, whether it be land, whether it be cash, whether it be grants and trusts and so forth. But at that time of this, the mass injustice of enslavement, and under Jim and Jane Crow, I say Jim and Jane Crow, segregation, it was legal to discriminate. So you don't sue criminally, because it was legal. But now, post Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act and so forth, it is illegal to discriminate and still get kind of federal funding and so forth. So the whole idea when we talk about international, the West Germans, paying Jewish people, for the Holocaust, South Africans, apartheid, paying those individuals, they all got some kind of material compensation for that injustice. But here in America, they even gave reparations to the enslavers, post Civil War, because they had lost their property and lost their, the abundance of their income that they were receiving off of the backs of those enslaved people. But when the 40 Acre and the Mule came up, it was, under the president at the time, Abraham Lincoln. He was assassinated, of course, just right at the end. But the next president, Johnson, is the one that squashed that. He said, no, that you're not going to get, reparations of the 40 acres and a mule, for you. And so we entered, a period of racial terror with the lynching and so forth. So again, when we're now in an era where it is illegal to do the kinds of things that they did then, we can still, I think, go into a court of law and file civil suit and expect, because we're not talking about beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the criminal standard, but a preponderance of the evidence, which is a civil standard.
So, next question. We're going to have a really succinct 6 minutes.
Well, I'll make my question just real brief. But I want to thank the panelists and Hofstra for continuing this dialogue in what often can be ignored. My question is, as it relates to reparation, there are some that argues that only descendants or folks who can trace their lineage directly to enslavement should be part of it, excluding maybe foreign-born blacks. And I know California, in their model, kind of adopted that approach. I just want to get the panel's feedback on that thinking.
When it comes to Tulsa, that's an important distinction. The Beyond Apology Commission.
Can you use a different mic? Okay. Thanks.
Now you got 10.
The Beyond Apology Commission has tiers in place. So the first tier is direct descendants, right? But there's like 4 tiers. And so then it would be people who lived in the community. And there's even a tier of people who were harmed by redlining and, through the 70s, which some say was almost worse than the massacre, right? And so there are different tiers, but I do think it's important what you're saying, because in a lot of these cases, there are more than 24 municipal reparations initiatives across the country. I would say if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen at the local level right now. The federal government is not going to do anything. But at the local level, reparations is growing. It's a growing movement in cities. And so they're, like you said, in California, they are trying to differentiate specifically who qualifies. I know I wouldn't probably qualify. My mother would. My father was white, but my uncle would, but that's a really important question. Who would qualify?
I just want to bring up also something that you said, this idea that those that were not born here, globally, reparations needs to have its own reckoning. We had that huge article in the New York Times where they called out France for really holding up Haiti, right? All that free labor. We have Barbados, who also had a sugar plantation. Like the Crown owes the Caribbean money. So globally, there needs to be a reparations reckoning. And I know that there's been ADOS that has been kind of, separating us. But we as a Black people must come together, because as soon as, if we can unite, we can get all the money that's owed to us. Because every week we work, we want a check. And there's been, years where people have worked for free. They need a check. What, as the kids say, run the coins, run me my money. So I think this is a great step in the right direction.
Yeah, but the French,
I'm going to go to our last question because we got 3 minutes left.
Ooh, we can't. Ooh.
Yeah. My question was more about I know that Tulsa is trying to give a housing reparations. Do you think it's possible that Tulsa can also give like money for businesses that were burned down if like a Black person wants to build a business, or like scholarships for people who want to become lawyers and doctors? There like a way, or like reparations for that, for they don't have to be burdened of like not being able to get into a good school because of different circumstances, of course, of like redlining, and also not being approved for business loans because of racial discrimination. So is there a part of the plan to give money for that, or is it just housing?
Yes, there is. Mayor Nichols' plan includes entrepreneurial support. It includes many, many things, even public lands that the city took from the Greenwood district. Now they're looking at, and that's going to be the next big thing, because public lands is in the hands of the city council. So what do we do with this land that's owned by the city? And the city that was a knowing conspirator, and we haven't said this yet, but we know the DOJ has, talked about that there were known KKK members not only on the city council, in the police force. The police force was already under investigation before the riot. Before the massacre, I should say. Well, they called it a riot back then. So they said, they're under investigation for participating in the riot. They were KKK members all across city government. So, that's in place for entrepreneurs, public lands, lots of pieces.
So I'll take the privilege of asking the final question. It seems like the current political moment we're in right now owes a lot to what's happening in Tulsa and sort of historic idea of reparations. Does anyone want to sort of, I know it's a huge...
Yeah, how long we have?
huge topic.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Now, I just want to say, colonialism. If you look at just, culturally speaking, what has become and made it into the zeitgeist of, our understanding of, where we are globally, politically, and so forth, that you can take that back and put it in historical context. Go back to the 1884 Berlin Conference when they had the carving up of Africa, and all of the colonizers from Europe, who took a piece of Africa and, continued that, underdevelopment of Africa, which, last until this day. And a lot of these countries did not become independent until the late 1950s, early 1960s, even until today in some, in some of the islands, Caribbean islands and so forth. So I'm thinking that when we talk about global reparations and having a movement of all African peoples in diaspora and making certain that the conditions that, our ancestors endured, that vestiges of, we continue to endure, that we get some kind of acknowledgement, some kind of atonement, some kind of reparations that, would at least make us not have to wait these estimated 200 years that if we were just to go as business as usual, that wealth gap would close, that there needs to be some kind of concerted effort, among the European Union, if you will, to make certain that, every place, where, colonies of people worked at, either free or, very cheap labor, get some kind of payment.
And so I want to thank...
Can I just say something real quick, 2 seconds? As far as American society, what I want, or what I desire, what I see for America specifically when you talk about our political climate, is an America climate or political climate that is not hostile to truth and repair. And if we could get to truth and repair,
Well, that was a perfect concluding statement. She had it in her back pocket all along.
I did, right there.
I want to thank Dr. Jonathan Lightfoot, Dr. Aisha Wilson-Carter, Dr. Kristal Zook, and Professor Dorsett. And thank you for joining with us in this conversation. Have safe travels home. Thank you.
Yes, yes.